So I fly around and I talk to big brands thinking about moving to the platform, and we help them like do e-commerce better, sell more on the internet. It's very much like, it's actually like this. Like we sit around a table, have a laptop, and we just talk about the platform for 8 hours. We go to dinner and then I fly back. So that's kind of like my whole profession. I've started out in technology, software engineering, and kind of moved to that. Sanctification to work. This is a concept I think that has been brought about in the last 100 years. You know, I think that Vatican II did an excellent job. There's been some core saints in the history of the church that have kind of brought this topic up, I think, for the laity. I think for people that are really trying to understand ordinary life. It's brought a lot of meaning for me. I've studied this quite a bit. I think it's very important for us to understand this, just kind of living as Christians in the middle of the world. So I always like to start off with a story. There was a story recently that came out. There was a Swiss guard that was doing an interview. This came out a couple years ago. And he's a big dude, 6'2". He was at the Vatican and he would get in trouble a lot. And supposedly he would get this kind of reprimand where he would have to go do dishes in the kitchen area where they would feed a lot of people. And he said that there was a bunch of nuns down there, but he hated this task. He hated the smell because there was the soup stuck to the tin of the pans, and so he had to go scrub. And so he was kind of cussing under his breath that he was having to do this. And so this nun, he said all the nuns were like these tiny women kind of swimming around him. And this nun, he was cussing under his breath, complaining that he was there. And this nun kind of pushed him out of the way and said, basically, move over. I think the translation, they translated to sissy because it was Italian. Move over sissy, or move over like lazy person, you know? So he got offended by this, but he just saw this nun and she kind of pushed him out of the way and just started scrubbing. She worked like this for like 2 hours, and he was kind of looking over her, and she was just working so hard. And then she vanished, and then he worked the rest of the day in this kitchen he hated. And at the end of it, one of his friends who was there in the kitchen was like, hey, that was Mother Teresa. Push you out of the way. And he was like, you know? And he was kind of offended. He was just like, she called me a sissy, like, what the heck? Like, he was kind of embarrassed, kind of offended. And he was like, the friend was like, she gave you her miraculous medal in a packet. And so he had like this medal that she gave him. Anyways, 2 weeks later, he loses his medal. So he's kind of embarrassed about that. Mother Teresa gives me this medal. He's on guard. This is like maybe 3 months after that. And word gets out that she's going to visit the Pope. And he's like there that day. She walks in the room and he's like so nervous not to make eye contact. Hopefully she doesn't understand, remember who he was. So she comes in, she does her thing, she meets, and he's just like, oh yeah, she's going to slip right out. And she starts walking out the room, darts right to him, looks him in the eye, hands him another medal and says, don't forget this one, sissy. And he's like, how did she know that I lost this medal? How would she ever find this out, And I think that there's like this kind of thing about like Mother Teresa, if you go study her life, and people have, I think the thing about her is like the intensity of their order, the intensity of the way they dressed, the way they managed themselves, the way that they actually did prayer, the way they worked, was a thing that converted people. And it's something to look at and kind of study. People have done this, like there's been a couple books that have come out, but she really truly understood this kind of connectedness between nature and spirit, body and soul. These things of which a daily tasks become things of prayer, and sort of this means of sanctification. Work becomes this means of sanctification, not only for her, but for people. You learn lessons through work. You develop, you kind of work through your own life through work. You learn virtue through work. Things that you don't want to do, you do. Things that you can get better. This author, Jim Toey, was a lawyer that was living in Oregon. Heard Mother Teresa's story way back when she was starting her in India, and he got word of her, and he was just kind of fascinated by the story. So he flew out there, and he's like, another guy didn't like the kind of looks of India. He'd grown up privileged, and he kind of went out to India, the smells, everything. So he goes to her order, and he opens up the door. They know he's coming, and it's just like all these, nuns kind of like helping people, working. He introduces himself. Mother Teresa says, "Hi, thanks for coming," then right away puts him to work. He kind of walked away from that, and this sort of converted him. Just the detail of what she helped people with, the smile, the small things of like taking care of people. And so I think that like this is thing that I think the laity of the church, I think everybody in terms of personal holiness understand that this is the details of life, the small things. We read this in Saint Teresa of Lisieux. We read this in John Paul II. God has his creation, and he's involved in this creation, and he invites humans to participate in the same thing. That is the ultimate kind of goal. That work shouldn't be a form of drudgery. It's not something that we should get out of and then have our free time. Work is a means to both for sanctification and for work. And we see this in Genesis. I think from a theological aspect, you could go back to Genesis and see, God at his creation gave Adam and Eve the garden to till before the fall. But I think people primarily look at work as that it is drudgery. It's like something we gotta do to pay for things, to help our family. It's something that maybe we just gotta get over, and then we work to the weekend. The other side of it is like maybe you don't think about it, and it's like we just do it. Sometimes it's a crapshoot. Maybe we like our work, maybe we don't. Either way, like we're just kind of making money to move on. And then the third side of it is, I think, which has brought about the church and these kind of core people that understood that ordinariness, sanctification through work can be a means of like just happiness and making the world better. Understand that work is good. So work can be something that's very good. That's something that can define us and help us. Work being defined as maybe a professional job, taking care of the home. My wife stays at home. There's just no possible way of 12 kids that she could possibly work at this point, My kids are a lot of work, and so there's some anecdotes about that too. But primarily it's like, I think of this stuff I do every day. I actually write this down. It's part of like the way I examine my life. I have my professional life. I have to do very well at that. I have to keep doing well. I have to help these companies do better on the internet. I help companies help their customers shop better on their website. This isn't like necessarily changing the world, but I do something well. I make things more convenient. On the other side, I'm a dad. I have small things I have to take care of. I have to take care of at night, I sort of have this responsibility of my twins wake up. If we help sweep the floors, we do everything. All these small things lead to my like personal holiness. And I think that there's kind of this core idea that the laity of the church are just off working. The ones that are actually in charge of the church, the priests, the bishops, maybe religious are like the core important ones, but like it really is a means of personal holiness for everybody, There's a homily I read quite a bit by Saint Isaiah Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei. It's very awesome. I think it's written for Christians in the modern world. It's called Passionately Loving the World. You can find it on the internet for free. He says that more on the contrary, when you realize now more than ever, God is calling you to serve him from the ordinary secular civil activities of human life. And he waits for us every day in the laboratory, the operating theater, in the army barracks, in the factory, in the workshop, and in the home, and in all an immense panorama of work. Understand this well. There is something holy and something divine hidden in the most ordinary situations, and it is up to each of us to discover it. So something intriguing about that, I think I heard that and I was like, I want to learn more about that. Primarily because I think that like, I got married and my wife and I weren't Catholic when we got married. We were converts to the church. We came in a year after marriage. And so we started having children. We both came from one child each on each side. And I thought a big family was 4, I wasn't raised anything religious. And so when I started having kid after kid, I'm like, wow, this demand is sort of keeping up. I kind of hit a wall, I would say, that I was like, well, the money, I still have to make good money. I still have to do all this thing. California is pretty expensive. So we had to figure that out as well. But I think primarily I needed help in finding the connection to my meaning with my work. And to get to work every day and wanting to do well. Not only that, but just also like, I think sometimes people can do well at part of their life of work professionally, but maybe, like as dads or, maybe moms, like you kind of slip up on other areas as like you're trying to raise your kids well. Sometimes I meet people that are like, well, I'm a really good dad, but I'm not professionally that good. And I think that there's a disunified life there. So where do we start? I think we just define what our life is through work. What do I do daily? How do I try to improve it? What do I see as a way to like align this and create a more unified life for these things? There's a story back in the 90s, there was a US politician. I heard this story from a priest. It's not publicly documented. I know a priest that, I don't know this politician's name. The priest gave spiritual direction to this politician, and he was a Catholic. He went to fly back. He had the John Paul II asked him to come back for a special meeting, and I think it was a senator. I think I know who he is, but the name was not given. Anyways, John Paul II asked him back, and it was a private mass with John Paul II. He brought his whole family. He had a large family, and so they go to this private mass, just him and his family, and he's hoping to like get special time with the Pope. He's got all his kids. He's got his wife there. They do the mass. John Paul II processes out. The whole family comes out, and he just can't wait to like ask him all these questions. John Paul II ignores him, kind of. Starts talking to his wife, playing with his kids, talking back to his wife, talking, kind of ignoring him. Anyways, JB2 starts just walking out the door. And he's like, the heck? He was open about it. Wish I had my time. I'm a politician, and talk about these things. Anyways, he thought he walked out the door. He came back. He heard a slap on his shoulder, looks back, and it's John Paul II. And he says, Senator, you're an important person, and I know it's a very important job, but you are a dad and a husband, and this is why, and that is a just as much important job for you. So think about that job. And I think it gets back to the task. We can do one task well. We can do one maybe not as well. We need to create unity. This comes back to, I think, Jesus Christ. Like in Mark chapter 7, verse 37, there's a line there that I had never realized. It said that the people were astonished, and they said, he does all things well. All things well. I think we forget that God became a man to perfect the human condition and perfect the human condition. We should strive to do that. So, catechism, you always hear these cool anecdotes, you hear these cool talks from saints, you hear these cool stories. The catechism backs this up and says work is for man, not man for work. Everyone should be able to draw from the work the means of providing for their life and for their family and serving the human community. So back to Mother Teresa, the means of sanctification. I think that there is not only a means of sanctification for us, there's a means of sanctification for others. Like we're talking about, we can impact people. We impact culture by our work. A lot of saints wrote about this. John Paul II, of course. Saint Josemaria Escrivá, founder of Opus Dei, talked about this. Saint Therese, Little Flower, talks about doing ordinary things well. If you go read her autobiography and she's talking about her life and she's talking about all the little places. There was a monk that when visited the convent, if you go look at the convent, it's a tiny place. It's really, really tiny. But in her eyes, the way she's expressing it, it's kind of this vast field, So it's these people really sanctified that and brought that to life. John Paul II, now I'll talk about John Paul II and Saint Josemaria Escriva. They were very connected people. They're both canonized saints. They were both canonized very quickly. John Paul II said the Mass for Saint Josemaria when he was canonized a saint. He said that he was literally the saint of the ordinary. And, JB2 thought ordinariness was like the essential part of the new millennia. It talks a lot about this, that in order for us to evangelize a post-Christian world, we have to do ordinariness well. We have to do it well. There's a story about this. We are out and about speaking with people, talking with people. I think that it's very important for us to keep an ear up. So we are a distributed team at my company. There are different types of people. Shopify is an odd company in that it's not odd. It just hires people for their knowledge, not the way they look. So there's a guy with piercings all over his face, for instance, and he's literally going and talking to the same executives I do. It's just Shopify. We laugh about it. There was a guy who had a face tattoo, and we're like, I guess we're hiring people with face tattoos now. It's just Shopify. There's 10,000 people. They're all it's a fun place to work. But he brought up recently, he's just in passing, my mom's in the hospital because she's stage 4 cancer. I think about him. I pray about him. I think about his life. I ask him often. I don't necessarily, this guy's really kind of anti-religious, but, I ran into him. We were together, and I just ran into him in Toronto a couple weeks ago, and I was like, hey, how's your mom doing? And he was kind of caught off guard. And he was like, she's doing good. And she's still very sick, and, it's very hard for us, but she's doing well, and it kind of caught off guard. Anyways, a week later, he messaged me and he's like, thank you for so much thinking about my mom. I didn't even, it hasn't crossed my mind. No one's even brought it up here, and I think that there is something about impacting people just out in ordinary society that doesn't necessarily need to be a billboard. But I'm Catholic, I got 12 kids, I'm gonna shove this down your face, I believe in this real presence, whatever. It just straight up, I hear about things, I have a daily prayer life, I go back to my daily prayer, and I pray for my friends. It's just, I think we're really back to this kind of first century idea of the church, which was a converted culture that's really kind of post-Christian. John Paul II was no different. There's a story of him. I know somebody that knew somebody that was his personal secretary, so there's a lot of cool stories from this era. Supposedly one night they lost him. They were back at the Vatican. They were traveling. They were back at the Vatican. They didn't know where he went. The guards were like, we thought he was in his room. We haven't seen him leave the building. This was kind of pre-camera. And when they asked around, where is he? He's not in his room. He's not in the chapel. Usually he's in his room or chapel. They couldn't find him. And supposedly someone was walking by the chapel again and looked down and saw that he was on the floor, and they were kind of panicked, thought he was fell down, but he was on the ground. He was talking audibly, he was praying, and he had this paper in his hand like this on the ground, and it was his list of names. And the guy realized, oh, that was the list. It was a list of men that had left the priesthood. They handed him the monthly list. And I think that's his task. He's in charge. This is kind of his children in a way, And so I think that work, the annoyances of work, the things we have to do every day, the people we interact with, the people that are punks, My children can be punks, definitely can be punks. I got a couple stories about this. I pray for them. I pray for them first. And I think that that's, again, the work, the means. Saint Teresa, Calcutta, this guy shows up out of nowhere. I'm sure she knew he was coming. I'm sure she had that comment praying for them in their daily life. So prayer first, work second. You're not going to be able to do it without prayer. You have to be recharged with a daily prayer life. This is very important. I always tell this story too. JP2, same secretary, tells the story. They drove him nuts all the time because he would have to do his devotion to adoration. There was one situation where he had to speak in Rome across town, and they had to take this barricade to get there, and they were a little late, so they were going to just get there right on time. And so they're driving, and they stop at a stoplight, and he looks over, and there's a church right there, and John Paul II says, "Stop right here, I need to make." And they're like, "Stop for what?" So they pull over, and they're like, "We're going to be late. We're late already. We're going to be late." And they didn't care. He got out of the car to do his adoration. He just felt like he had to recharge his batteries, and that was the way he had to do it. It drove everybody nuts. It was just him, it was him. So the point being, we can't do it without prayer first. Prayer comes first. Getting into breaking this down, I'm very kind of bullet point, probably not good for some people. For me, it is. I do an exam twice a day. I do exam at noon. I do exam before I go to bed. I create a list of what I have to do. What do I do? Did I do it well? Is my space clean? Is my office clean? I do an exam every night. I get very detailed on this. Am I nice to people in my work? Sometimes I can be I was kind of a punk today to somebody. I don't know. So can I do this better? Yes, I struggle with this. It can be difficult. As a dad, if you've met my kids, if you met my wife, my kids are they're both of us, obviously, but my kids are crazy spectrum, both back and forth. I have one kid named Albie. He just finished first grade this year. This morning he was like, "Hey, you're going to my promotion, right?" And I was like, "You don't get promoted to second grade." I got too much going on. Anyways, he's just one of those guys that when you walk 2 blocks with him, it takes 30 minutes because he chats everybody up. I was walking with him in Santa Barbara. This is a year ago with my mom, and we were going a couple blocks, of course, just back to the car. And he's just chatting everybody. There's a police officer. He's talking to a police officer, asking him how do you like your job? This guy's in first grade. Anyways, we come to this woman, less means, probably homeless. She had pink shoes on, she was kind of doing something with the paper. He's walking 10 feet in front of me, and of course, he notices the pink shoes. Stops, looks at her, and is like, "I love your shoes," And this lit up her day. This is it sounds like this woman hasn't been spoken to in 10 years. And looks up, looks at Albie, starts smiling, but she's missing 3 teeth. Poor woman. Anyways, Albie goes from smile, loving the shoes to dialing on the teeth, the missing teeth. And yeah, that I was like, oh no, what's next? My kid's gonna embarrass me or whatever. He goes, "You're missing teeth." And she said, "Yeah, kind of got embarrassed." Anyways, I was just gosh, my kids embarrass me sometimes. Anyways, he saved it. He goes, my brother is missing teeth. And she goes, "Is he older like me or younger than you?" And he goes, "Older." And she's like, "Oh, okay, we're the same, He's like, "Yeah, okay." That kind of saved it. And my daughter, Mary, we had a friend over. My wife is on Instagram, and sometimes people just hey, friend to friend, "Hey, I'm in the area. I would love to come visit your family, whatever." Great. People that are not a part of the faith, my brother-in-law's in a band, and there's some of this connection with this group where they come through, and people are in bands, and they come stop by or whatever. So this woman comes and visits us, and I'm kind of talking in the yard. This happened, my daughter was 6 years old, and I'm talking to this woman, and just, she came over to visit, and my daughter Mary comes up, and I'm talking to this woman, and she comes up and she looks at me and she goes, "Dad, are you in love with this woman?" I'm like, yeah. These people can annoy us. My own kids can annoy me. It takes a lot. Like, I think that, again, getting back to prayer starts first. We need the fuel to like do this well, but it really, if we did have faith in this, it does work. There's a new couple that's they're in the canonization process. They just were named servants of God. They had 9 children, Tomas and Paquita Avira. They lived in Spain. Interesting couple because they're pretty modern. They have 9 children, and like I believe all of them are religious. And so they have been, they are people that are going through the beatification process. They're being examined. The only thing they have left is kids. Like, obviously their marriage is very focused on here. And the kids are just kind of like, there's interviews with the kids, like, why did your parents stand out? They would just say, like, they weren't preachy, didn't really force us to do anything. We had our obligations, but they were insanely cheerful, like very cheerful in the house. They kind of mastered cheerfulness. They were happy about everything. Obviously they disciplined us. We were out of whack sometimes. But when they were asked, like, what did they teach you about this? Like, why did you want to kind of, they did daily mass, they did daily prayer, they did daily rosary. They weren't forced to do these things as kids, but they all did them. And I think that the response back was, we wanted nothing more than that. We just saw that, in their life. And so it was just something that we just wanted. And so I think that, like, small tasks done well is the biggest impact we can make on the culture. And I think that, especially if we look at our own work, they kind of lead this homily again, passionately loving the world. Saint Azaria says, "I assure you, my children, that when Christian carries out with love the most insignificant everyday action, the action overflows with the transcendence of God. And that is why I've told you so often, hammered away, that the Christian vocation consists on living a heroic virtue out of the prose of each day. Heaven and earth seem to merge, and my children on the horizon. But where they really meet is in your hearts, and when you sanctify your everyday tasks." And so I think that we really have a big impact. A lot of the hands of the church are on ordinary work every day. So that's it. Thank you.